It depends on the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on the number of security flaws.
It's a great.
You just don't look those up, and then you don't worry about
Some
it.
languages.
For a second. You go to the Hangouts and then.
Oh, me and Hangouts and
yeah. Okay. We will need your mic in a minute, but.
Wait, is that my screen?
No, that's me.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'll put you back for a second.
What happened? Where am I?
Feedback.
Right there. Yep.
All right. Okay. So we're about to get started, guys. I know we're a little bit behind.
Right on time.
Right on time? All right. That's what I like to hear.
According to mine. I don't know about that.
Perfect. That thing's wrong. Whatever it is, it's wrong.
It acts like it's so authoritative too.
I know, right? All right. So thanks everybody for coming out. We're gonna have Steve's gonna give us a talk on picking your front end framework. That's gonna be pretty awesome, given the landscape of what we have now. It's like whatever you pick, you always feel like you're wrong. But it'll be interesting to hear that. What I have up on the board here is if you're new, if you haven't been here for a while or whatever, we have a backlog of talks and things in the pipeline. Again, I believe I'm a little out of date. So we're here, next JavaScript framework. And then next up, we have parsing C code using Python API to generate that. Then we have the Swagger API. Then we have practical assembly.
Accessibility.
I'm sorry. Accessibility.
I don't know nothing about assembly.
Shane's gonna give that talk, so yeah. I'm just changing his talk up on him midstream. Then we have diversity in IT. Christine and myself are going to be giving that talk, and then we'll have the dev group social. We'll have lightning talks. We'll have the food that we were presented earlier on, and then
Mom's cooking.
Yeah, mom's cooking. So I got to make sure that we schedule that right. Make sure she's available. And then we'll have continuous growth as well, somewhere in there. That'll be the backup in case one of the other talks don't happen. If you have suggestions, like I said, we have 47 in the backlog. We have 4 that are being planned, 11 that have been assigned, but not necessarily scheduled yet. If you have ideas, I think there were a few more that came in, I think last week I saw. Just add them to the backlog. If you don't have access, just shoot me an email and I'll add them myself. But also, if you would like to present, I make this plea all the time. Like when we first started, I think I did like 80 or 90% of the talks, and most of the stuff I didn't know ahead of time. I just kind of said, well, here's a topic, and I'll use that as a forcing function to find out about it, and give a presentation. Everyone's been completely cool about it, even if it was like, hey, this other person in the room knew a little bit more about it than I did. No one heckled us, that sort of thing. So feel free to pick a topic in there if you want some help getting it together. We can do that as well. We can split the time. It doesn't have to be the whole session as well. It can be 5-10 minutes if you like. Just let me know how much time you want so we can schedule it so that we have the right balance of information over the course of the day. And with that, I've talked enough. I'm going to hand it over to Steve. Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. If you can go ahead and unmute your mic, I'm going to try to mute mine, and then I'll give you back the screen.
Yeah.
Tell I'm.
Hello? Since this is my speaker and we don't have anything plugged in, I'm hoping we won't have any more feedback. There was an error loading my app.
And your mic's muted.
No, that should be.
Oh, this is unmuted.
Yeah, it's right in there.
Okay.
Got to switch over to your
Screen share?
It is sharing? Okay. I won't touch it. I'm lying. I'm shutting a couple things.
Right to the gods and it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So good. Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk in particular about the process of picking front-end web frameworks for projects. And we have a fair number of people involved in this in the room, right? It's a tough era in which to do this, right? We went through a period of time for a long time where this was our answer to the question, right? We had a different problem back then. We had a problem that we had browsers that had vastly different APIs and incompatibilities, and we just really needed something to pull that together. And then jQuery did us a favor too and added a layer of simplicity onto some of the more complex APIs. It was a gift. And we for a lot of the folks at the time, we had our Moo tools and everything else, but a lot of us ended up on this front. The things changed though a little bit. What we found was the browsers really adopted a lot of the wonderful ideas that jQuery had implemented as a library, right? So there's a lot of, I kind of feel this way about myself. I still write what I think of almost as jQuery apps. I just don't need jQuery to do it anymore. I have query selectors. I have I have fetch APIs for doing calls. I have a consistent model for registering events, right? So this is no longer a default, and we can see that in the statistics too, right? So the next sort of closest thing we got to a standard for a while was AngularJS, right? Angular was very popular and it grew to have a lot of support. But it suffered over time with that same problem that a lot of frameworks do, which is it's built to solve a particular problem, and that problem over time changes. A lot of the things that we needed it to do for us, changed underneath it as we as consumers with browsers changed as well. And as a result, it got to the point where it's carrying a lot of code forward with it that wasn't necessary anymore. The team, as a result, has moved on to a brand new code base, right? And as of July 1st of this year, it's no longer being updated, AngularJS. It's in a 3-year long-term support cycle, after which that'll be dropped. So this was our next default answer was we can go, and I've done this, right, is go with Angular. Now AngularJS was the popular choice. But now if we're choosing that for a framework, we know we're choosing a soon-to-be unsupported product. So, so what we have to do is have a different model, right, for how we're going to do these type of things. How we can do these successfully in an organization or on a team to pick a solution that's going to have legs, right? Because it takes a long time to implement these solutions, and we want them to be successful and to last for a while, right? So this is a problem I find as well too now, is we have a host of different frameworks. Was that a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
When you're saying not updated anymore, is that just Angular or is it also Angular 2?
Specifically AngularJS, which is 1.x. It falls under the 3-year LTS deal. Then no, Angular is on to version 6. Something, yeah, it's they're rolling like gangbusters on that. But if you have this app, and they just came out with this week with a few updates for a new update ideas for migrating from Angular.js, which is the 1.x version, to Angular, which is the 2 and later version, right? So they're continuing to come up with tools, but
That's awesome.
yeah, because the original tools were not
It's gonna be
loved.
for us too.
But this is the case. So it's supported, and I think only security patches, only non-breaking changes was what I think I read they said they would do. So we have this host of ones too. Let me ask you, I mean, some of these ones, like some of the smartest people I know are huge Aurelia or Polymer or Ember fans, although they don't seem to get as much press. And this is another question, right? Is what's our criteria for success when we're picking one of these projects? So, let's see. Okay, so we're going to talk about the human brain a little bit in this, because this is a decision-making process for teams, right? As much as it's a technology one, it is an organizational and a team issue, right? And so my first thought, I'm going to go back to thinking fast and slow for a second, is to think about our intuition, right? Is how many people here could give me a quick answer? What's the best framework to build web apps on today? And I won't call you. How about that? I raise your hand if you have an opinion on that. I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to call anybody on it, right? I have opinions on it too. Now, do you feel like you could support that opinion if it came to a group of peers who had say a broad knowledge of something, right? I'm doing the talk, and I think I would struggle to say I have a solid knowledge of all the possible opinions on this, definitely, right? But we tend to rely on opinions a lot, and our opinions are great for making certain types of technology-based decisions. Really, like games. It turns out intuition is great for games. It's because we have very short cycles for feedback. It's because the cost of failing is low. You generally don't have to involve a lot of other people in it. And so you can train your intuition. And maybe I should have a Fortnite instead of this, but you can train your intuition to be good for that type of things. But that doesn't sound much like picking a major technology decision for your team, right? Where it's that low cost, that iteration, those decisions. That's not really a description of what we do. So let's just maybe agree to the idea that intuitive, I just read an article and I've got a great idea, isn't a great way to make these decisions, right? And so the other alternative that we see a lot is, this is hilarious. So I had a couple of examples of things to ask people to prove that their intuition isn't all that great. And I was like, well, this might not be the right crowd to ask this question and have them not know the answer. So here, I'll skip that one too, in case you're all like, yeah. What's the surface area of the Pacific Ocean? You know, the point of these really is to say that humans are really bad at making intuitive estimates of things that they don't have practice and they're not involved in. That's not the way our mind works. So the next plan is the research option, right? If we aren't able to come up with something intuitive, then the right answer, and I do this more than I should, is to get the stack of books and articles and thoroughly research topics, which it sounds well, but it turns out it doesn't especially lend itself to successful decision making, and that some of the worst decisions of all time, you know, fall well into this well-researched option. They were talking about the number of corporate mergers that don't actually return shareholders. I'm going to use that as a well-researched decision. The number of corporate mergers that don't actually return a value to their shareholders, right? Those are thought out decisions. We're all careful about deciding if we should merge company A and company B, theoretically, right? It turns out about 80% of them don't return a value to the end users, to their customers, right? To their shareholders. They talk about the number of people who go to law school and decide that it was a bad idea. They wish they hadn't done it. Things like this, that where you know, people have put a lot of thought into it, and it doesn't guarantee you success, which was a problem for me when I was reading this, because it turns out, here's the idea. We try hard, we think we know what we're doing, and we try and it doesn't work, and then we come to the next one, right? You know, it's like we try again, you know, so sometimes, but this is a hard way to go at some point, right, in our stuff. So so if I'm saying, you know, I'm describing two of our main models of thinking, right, is intuitive and analytical thinking. Well, what is it that makes our decision-making process better? First is understanding all of our biases. As people who deal with, you know, groups of approvers, as people that work in the software industry in general, right, having a fundamental understanding of biases is a skill on par with understanding how to program computers, I believe, right? These are things that you come across every day, and understanding them can help you sometimes lead discussions towards making better decisions, or even lead yourself towards making better decisions. So this was a free chart, yourbias.is. But in general, I wanted to just cover a couple and ask you guys if any of these ring a bell from some of the projects you've been on. The sunk cost fallacy. The idea that it's like, yes, it turns out that this is a bad idea, but we've been working on it for so long and we've spent so much money. Aren't we sure that we shouldn't be throwing good money after bad? Or time, right? This often happens. Tied a little bit to if sometimes maybe someone's career is tied. They feel like it's tied to these decisions.
There used to be a movie called The Money Pit.
Yes. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes, those exact cases. Confirmation bias. We tend to find, this is a major problem in our cable news era as well. We tend to find information that agrees with our existing preconceived notions. Like I have a particular framework I do a lot of work on, and I have to work on not finding those things that talk about how great it is as well, right? It's very easy to feel good about your investment in time by finding things that support it. I'm really close. You think it would make it that far? Fundamental attribution bias. This idea that when you have a team or you're close and problems happen, you tend to look to the circumstances that cause that, the weather, something else happening. You tend to look at, you know, the environment for flaws. When there's another team somewhere else and they're having problems, you tend to think of it as character flaws, problems in their approach, personal issues, right? We tend to see all of our issues in this sort of a fashion. And then the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that there's a learning curve that we all experience, and there's a problem is the best you feel about your understanding of a topic tends to be very early in that learning curve, right? Less educated people tend to feel better about making decisions than more educated. As you spend more time on these frameworks, or any technical topic, you start to understand how much you don't know. And you start to say you want to tap down your enthusiasm, because maybe enthusiasm you really had at the outset. Because now that you know more, you know some of the pitfalls. You understand it's a bigger environment than you originally thought. And that can cause people that are better equipped to make decisions to hold back a little bit compared to people who are new and enthusiastic. So these are just a few of them, right? But am I correct that you've maybe seen some of these in effect on projects you've worked on? Yeah, these are important. And if you understand them enough, you can kind of work a little on countering some of them. Yeah, just a couple of the famous ones. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. There's no reason for any individual to have a computer in his home. That's because they carry them on as a phone, right? That's not what he was thinking about in '77. But these people, they're not dumb, right? These were captains of industry at the time. It's just, it's easy with the wrong perspective to have mistakes, especially about the future. So what are we supposed to do? I've told you that everything that I initially think of is a failure. Like, what is the proper way to set your course for a future project? Well, I found a good idea in this book, Decisive, that was talking about successful projects based on technical decisions. It's a pretty good book in general. And they were doing research on, yes, I'll get that in a second. They were doing research on successful and unsuccessful decisions. There's a host of great, terrifying percentages of bad decisions that they talk about. But one of the things they did was they asked teams what percentage of their time they spent on, instead of on the actual decision they were making, you know, go left, go right, like on setting up the process that they used to make a good decision. So, and these were some of the kind of things that they asked about, like, did you spend time documenting uncertainties or problems in your decision. It's okay to do research, but what were the things that you didn't find out? Did you go out of your way to find people with opposing positions to what you were thinking? Did you get a range of perspectives? When you look at problems, did you spend time and try to rescope them into different issues? Like maybe you don't need a JavaScript framework, for instance. And what they found was, and these numbers always seem a little like magic numbers to me, but they came back and said the investment in this kind of time produced 6 times the benefit that other things did. That this was the material difference between people that were successful and were not. Did you have a process that forced you to think about maybe some of the more uncomfortable aspects of making a decision like this? So establishing a process. So let me just check. So yeah. So what are some of the other benefits? You do a process. Processes by nature tend to include participation. You're not sitting in a corner hopefully by yourself making up the process and producing the results, right? You're including other people to get those perspectives. And what you're doing when you're doing that is you're bringing people in and making them possibly a champion for your cause as well, right? You're not the only person that's coming up with this decision. Maybe they can be involved in making it as well. Yeah, processes also tend to age better than decisions. And as an argument for that, if you pick a decision that was made a year ago and you have to defend it simply based on the idea that we've done option X, why did you do option X? Option X sucks. Well, it seemed like the best at the time. I mean, there was a horrible decision. Like that's hard. It's hard to defend some of those points in retrospect. If somebody comes back and says, why did you do project X? And say, we went through a process and we evaluated this and I can show you the process that we went through. That might have some additional grounds that you can use for, later if you need to for explaining decisions. And we want our decisions to have legs. We want them to last, right? So part 2, want to talk to you a little bit about when you're thinking about a process, like what are the things you might want to consider when you're making that type of a decision, particularly for frameworks, but this goes for technology a little in as well. And by the way, maybe it's worth mentioning, if you haven't figured that out already, I'm not going to tell you which framework to use for your next project because there isn't a right answer for that, right? One of the real challenges about this is we can talk about, hopefully we will talk about some of the big options that you have and their differences, but those differences change all the time. Did anybody ever see a UFC, all the fighting contests that they have? They have all these fighting championships. They're kind of a little like boxing, except people kick each other too. And I remember when I was young and I saw one of those, it was interesting because you had a kung fu specialist and a sumo wrestler and so, somebody from the Israeli military, and you get these interesting, crazy martial arts styles that would compete. But a funny thing happened over time, which was the one guy got knocked out, noticed what the other person did and said, well, that's not really kung fu, but if I don't figure out what I'm doing, I'm just going to get knocked out every time. So they added it to it. And the other person picked his little bit out. So now they call this stuff mixed martial arts, right? Because if you just show up with one style, you're not going to do well, right? Well, the frameworks are taking a bit of a mixed martial arts style too. If you find this actively, like Ember came out with a CLI that Angular literally forked and did their own Angular CLI, which funny now, there is also a Vue CLI. And they did something a little different when they did React. They did create React app a little differently. They did just a way that was meant to help protect you from changes in dependencies in all your NPM packages. So they did a little different. So what happened with that idea? It migrated over to the other systems as well, right? They're absolutely watching and thinking about the features. In fact, all of these modern frameworks are really owe heavy debt to one of the frameworks that I don't think is really ever going to be that successful, which is Polymer. Polymer really set the future direction. So what you see with all of these frameworks is they have some fundamental attributes that are different, but they are actively engaged in sniping the best features of the other ones and trying to improve themselves by taking advantage of those. So, all right. But criteria, here's some criteria that I found good for me. And this is from Sarah May, who, it's a joke that she has a system. Somebody told her if you can have a system, you can make a lot of money consulting. And so she's got the May system for technical decisions. And you can really think of this, her list, as she's broken it up maybe between maybe a 2x2 graph. You could say things that relate directly to your team and things that are more related to the community. Then things that are part of the product itself in the other axis, and things that are about the surrounding community. And that's a reasonable way to break things up, right? But some kind of a criteria where you make sure you're not only thinking about your problem from one direction. So for instance, for hers, I stand really close, it works. Does that defeat the purpose if I can tap the key with my pointer? First one's the interface. So this is, what is your direct experience working with the product in terms of, in terms of the tools and the documentation and the things they've made available for you? Are they sufficient? Do they have that, one of those CLIs we were talking about that Angular and Vue and React and Ember and everybody has? Are you able to build samples easily from the documentation? Does it work? And is the documentation that comes with it useful, right? Activity in this case is really taking a look at the team, and we'll show some examples of this if we have time for the different modern projects. Do you believe they have a successful team that's going to support this product well? And you can do that these days a lot of the time by taking a look at GitHub for a lot of these projects. How many people are working on it? What's the range of permits? How long have there been security issues sitting open is a pretty important one for me. But do you believe that there is a team supporting this? Because you can always decide to be the team that supports it yourself. But in my case, I'm hoping to find a team that's doing a good job of this already. Popularity. I use this term a couple times, and most of it, we're computer programmers. The popularity is not a term we always associate with ourselves, right? But in this case, what is the popularity of this framework in the market? And this one's more controversial for a lot of people because they have a favorite one that isn't. But how important is it for it to be one of, say, the top 2 or top 3 frameworks? I know a lot of people say Aurelia is the best framework available right now. And it's got a very low market share. Is that okay? Does that matter? This is making the argument that it does. That you want a framework where you see a lot of blog posts. Your problem has already been solved on Stack Overflow. That's how I program these days, right? That's how you solve problems. I used to buy books. Now I go to Stack Overflow. Are you finding the necessary support material to make this job possible? I go and I look on my Pluralsight or Safari or Egghead, subscriptions, and I want to see some documentation that I can use to keep up to speed with things. And last but not least, familiarity in this case is really saying the actual core product. When you're using the product, do you feel good about it? Like I have one of these frameworks I'm using 90% of the time now, and I'm happy every time I use it. And I feel like it's easy to support and maintain as well, right? Do you get those kind of feelings with your hands on the code? So if you can look at those type of options, they are going to help give you that perspective. There's a breadth to those decisions, right? I'm going to get into some of the more tactical ones too. I have my little list that I think are important for these kind of calls. I hope you can certainly chime in if you have some ones that are important to you as well. I had a joke in this originally, by the way, later about like, does your software ever go up on a spaceship? I seriously did, because because in most rooms that's a pretty funny statement. So but certainly you're probably not using npm to do continuous deployments to your, I don't think, to your satellite. But for a lot of people, that's the way they're doing things. So browser support is really great these days on the whole, but we still have some of these legacy IE9 things. But most browsers are fairly similar. But you need to check this, and for mobile browsers. Facebook, for instance, is getting to be a giant browser market share in the mobile space. So, is your framework being supported on the platform that your customers use? What kind of tools do you use with your framework? And if you guys have not seen it before, let's see if my Wi-Fi is still working. I'm going to grab this. Unfortunately, well, I have a mix. Every piece of data that I was able to update, I updated with new statistics. Some of the reports I'm talking about here really came from the end of last year, beginning of this year, because people do end of the year summaries. But this is one of those end of the year tool summaries. But it's nice where it goes in and says, this graph. If I look, I can say, well, if I'm using React, that were the percentage of folks using that in regards to ES6, or how Elm is being used, Flow, TypeScript, how that relates to different frameworks. So you can check that synergy. Like one of the interesting ones we're seeing now in the React spaces, we're seeing a lot of people using TypeScript with React, which wasn't the original idea. TypeScript was being used more exclusively with Angular. So, but are there other parts of the ecosystem that are foundationally important to the type of thing that you're doing? Switch back. Checklist. Do you have a build process, and will it work with it? This one's showing Babel, Webpack, React. React is one that certainly, for a long time now, they used to work with Broccoli, but for a long time has worked with Webpack and Babel. TypeScript is another alternative a lot of people are using instead of Babel. Are you comfortable with the list of dependencies? Have you guys looked at the list of dependencies for Angular, React, or these frameworks? The amount of node modules that get pulled with these? If you haven't, as a fun exercise sometimes, take a look at the huge amount of code that these things pull. And are there questions or issues with with the dependencies that you require for some of these projects? Oh, ECMAScript standards. Where are you in the model? Like one of the things that people have been happy about with Vue is that it tends to support ES5, right? So if you're thinking of your JavaScript stuff, particularly in an ES5 model, it's going to work better. If you're doing React is going to expect you to be comfortable with functional programming and with a fair amount of ES6 code. You can theoretically do it without, but you're not going to want to. In fact, that's a big part of the learning curve. People say that React's hard to learn. There aren't very many concepts in React, except for ES6 concepts, which are used heavily. So are you comfortable with updating that as well? Do you have a particular server-side rendering model that you need to use? Because there are some serious limitations on how those are set up today. I have a bunch of ASP.NET projects, and they've got some stuff set up that they say works with ASP.NET. Some of it doesn't work the way you would expect. They've kind of gone and done their own separate thing that I'm not interested in. So that affects me on some of my choices. What's the mobile story? It's a crazy world for mobile development, right? Right now, in terms of the native stuff and the Flutter stuff and the React natives and the Ionics and the progressive web applications, which I think will be a big part of this as well. What is the direction that you're interested in doing for mobile? Oh, I just mentioned progressive web apps, other new browser features. PWAs would be a really big one. And some of the, I think React ships with a manifest for PWA out of the box. I wonder how many people are accidentally doing progressive web apps because they didn't look at the template for React. But if there are particular things that you want to support, that you need support for, does your framework support those as well? They're much better about this these days. So, how modular do you want the technology to be? And this is one of the primary cases between something like Angular and something like Vue and React. Vue and React tend to be more open to the HTTP stack you want to do for service requests. Originally, the idea was you pick your own router. Vue even has the case of saying where for React and Angular, you're going to want to have a front-end build tool. Does anybody here do React, by the way? In theory, you don't need one, right? You can import React and React DOM, and you can write all your own code. I don't know. I've never heard of anybody doing it, really. Except for classes. So you are signing up for a front-end build process. And I think that's a good thing. But if you were thinking about doing something more like the AngularJS, the AngularJS jQuery style, where you're just doing a script and pulling files, you might be happier with Vue. If you're comfortable with the idea, if you really would like to have the idea to pick things like different HTTP stacks or such, you might be happier with things. Well, not Angular. Angular is more prescriptive in particular, right? In terms of telling you things about clients and routers. Is it? Where was I? All right, we're going to just have to give up on, well, we covered those quick. It's kind of funny for, Move this closer. Or, I don't know. Here we go. Try this. Right there. All right, please ignore all of my backward stuff. All right, there we go. Regulations, right? You can check in terms of your regulations or certifications. Anything that you require of a framework, check that in advance, right? Performance SLAs. I think all of the systems are working pretty hard on performance at this point, but you can think about if you have any concerns about performance. So just those are some of the particular criteria that I have found important. Am I missing any important ones? Do you guys have particular things in addition to those types that you guys are considering?
One of them, this is not necessarily a great thing, but it's a realistic thing, is how different is it from what your team already knows? It's a learning curve, and how much time do you have to get up to speed with that new thing?
I think that's really the first question to ask on all these, actually. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you bring it up. Is what is your team capable of executing with now, and what are the timelines and expectations of your project? You know, this is all important stuff, but the reality is if you're going to fail because you're not leaving a realistic amount of time for something that you have to do, be tactical about it, right? So, this is some of this has a little bit of a more of a long-term flair to it, right? But the key thing is to get projects done. And so if you find that you have time frame restrictions and talent restrictions, yes, absolutely consider that as well.
I'm trying to, I was going to ask the number of updates, or how young a framework is and how many updates occur in a course of, okay, I just started this and they've already came out with 4 updates. They've already changed X, Y, and Z, so I have to go back and reevaluate it because I rechanged my code.
The frequency of breaking changes.
And then in the old days, security. The number of security update fixes.
Yeah.
Rails.
No, security is this real, very serious issue. There was, I saw one of they're a group that runs one of the Java package managers. But they did, so it's not NPM specific, but in general, they were saying the percentage of packages with known security flaws in them in the wild is like 6%, or the downloads was 6%. So 6% of every package downloaded by somebody to use in their app has a known security flaw at the time that it's done, and that the number of those that don't get fixed is like 40%. So if you're picking one, quite often it's somebody who said, I'm tired of that, whatever. And it's hard to even know that unless you have a tool that's doing that for you. So one of the things I like with GitHub is I get an email every once in a while, probably telling me that this has a security issue or something in it, right? So yeah, but you need some kind of tool for that because you have hundreds of packages for most of these things now. Yeah, and how fast do they change them? And are you able to, not to joke about the deep space satellite thing, like how often can you push changes from your package manager? Not so often sometimes.
Well, for us, one of the things that came up is we started the project right before Angular 2 came out. So it was like kind of in beta.
Yeah.
And so we're on Go.js, and we considered both of them. I wasn't around for this part, but now we're like looking at the end of life of Go.js, and it's like, well, we'll probably upgrade to Angular 2, but
or 6 or 8.
We're still kind of working on getting our product fully stable anyway. Why didn't we just start with 2 and Angular 2 and just kind of move with Angular 2?
Bumpy road. That was a bumpy road. That's probably one.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was just kind of like an awkward situation there.
You have a key, and I just have one little slide about it, but that's a key question that we're asking. And is what are you doing with old Angular JS projects? And it's going to have a lot to do with how the market share and things work out. Where's that going to land? And I think you can see the Angular team's concern about that case in the fact they built a whole set of packages for doing migrations that was basically sort of shunned.
Complex and hard.
Yeah, and it didn't work if you're using router. At one point, they were saying, you're like, oh well, if you're not, thanks, right? And the other idea was you're literally like loading AngularJS and Angular and it could be like by component, it could be one or the other on a page or things like that, where the complexity and stuff was crazy. But the idea that, and I just heard about this week, but they're coming out with alternative migration plans now. It would suggest, they understand how important that scenario is. So, all right, next section, some statistics, right? It's good to have statistics on this. There's a variety of different sources, and none of them are perfect, but you can look at them in combination and get some ideas about how things are working in the marketplace. Yeah, and so the fashion question. Does it matter if things are popular? I think yes, absolutely yes, it does in this market, right? I don't want to be responsible for bringing any of these along. I want to be able to put an ad out and hire somebody who's done something before. And I want eyes on a project to look for ways to improve it or to find issues with it. And those are some of the things you get better with a more popular framework. So I'm going to be one of the people who contends that. I will never argue with somebody who did Polymer or Aurelia or one of the maybe less popular, but impressive projects. But to me, this is important, and this is why stats are important as well. Okay, Google stats. Have you guys have heard of the Googles? This is a stat for jQuery, Angular, React, and Vue. The key thing being is we're actually jQuery is still the #1 question, right? But then I think we have, I believe it's, should have left that on the chart, React, Angular, Vue for questions. We have a little problem right now with Vue because PlayStation has a Vue product out. So PlayStation Vue fits into the same category of computers and IT and technology. So you get kind of anomalous results maybe if you're just looking at searches for Vue. But what I found very interesting was the diversity geographically of questions. And I've seen this actually looking at job market stats as well. There is a distinction. The DC area, actually Washington, DC, by a tiny margin, has more questions for React. But the surrounding area is very Angular focused. If you're on the West Coast, you're talking about React. If you're in Nebraska, you are talking about Vue. Although I'm wondering about how PlayStation fits into that number. There was a big one for a long time with Vue. It was tremendously popular in China. And the thought was it was because Evan Vue speaks Mandarin. The author, and he's a U.S. citizen. He born and raised in the U.S. But the idea that he was somebody who could communicate with some folks might have helped the initial adoption of the product. And there's a lot of work going there as well. NPM stats. So some of these are from the. This is one from the end of the year. But this is major frameworks as a percentage of the registry. There's a little lies, damn lies, and statistics. Even this number, by the way, is actually increasing as a total. It's just this is as a percentage of downloads. It's dropping precipitously because NPM is growing so fast. But this one's Backbone. Backbone is clearly losing in market share. React. And here's where we get confusing a little bit, is we call Angular by a lot of names. So arguably this is Angular, JS, Angular, and all things Angular. So React, those guys down. Down in the corner here, Ember, Preact, Vue. Vue's still pretty small in this particular case. And this was talking about in terms of the percentage of the share versus growth. Yeah, you get ones like Preact is a smaller version of React. It's growing like gangbusters, effectively from almost zero. So it's easy to show a high percentage growth and still have a relatively small number. That doesn't mean that number is not going to grow into something impressive over time, though. So what we see is big growth, particularly in Vue. See large overall market share, React, and to some extent Angular. NPM stat is a utility you can run yourself. This is nice. So you can pull these type of statistics at any time. So for the last year, here was download statistics from NPM. React, Angular, and Vue. Interesting that Vue downloads are showing comparable with Angular.
Use what Angular should have been.
I'm sorry, what?
Use what Angular 2, everyone expected Angular 2 to be.
There's that real question, and I know third-hand the story about Evan Vue and how he was doing stuff with the Angular team, and I don't know if I have my story correct on that, but yeah, there's definitely an interesting story about what Vue and Angular have to do with each other. But substantial numbers, like at this particular week, React 2.7 million, Vue 400,000, Angular 329,000. Pretty big difference in downloads. Now, this is a older one, but showing those percentages, like React up by 174%, 68 for Angular, 30 for Backbone. That was the one that was showing the drop. That's actually a 30% gain, in terms of real terms. That's just how fast NPM is growing. AngularJS, Vue, 14,000% growth over that year. Still the smallest of the big ones, though, right? State of JavaScript, if you get a chance, I can post links back to you if you want. Stateofjavascript.com did a great report going through and talking about a survey of, I think, 30,000 JavaScript developers that they did at the end of last year. So the colors, dark purple, I have used it before and I'll use it again. Light purple, I haven't, but I want to use it. Dark yellow, I've heard of it. Light purple is I've used it before and would not use it again. So purple means used it. Yellow means doesn't use it. The darks are the positives. I did use it and I want to use it again, or I haven't used it and I want to use it again. The lights are the negatives. So the number one clear winner here by a mile is React in that survey, followed by no framework, which is interesting. Like the people who said I'm not going to use no framework. Okay. Angular 1. With a huge percentage here saying, I've used it and I'm not going to use it again, which I think falls into this category of saying that by the time this happened, the writing was already on the wall about the switch. Angular 2 and down. Some of these numbers are the ones for things like Polymer and Ember and Aurelia, though, where you're saying they just don't have a tremendous interest or adoption rate from the developer community. GitHub. JavaScript, good report. So stars are a funny thing, right? How do people care about stars? They do. Okay. So a star basically means you care about a project, right? You have chosen to track. Maybe you just want to track it, or maybe you want to give it your little stamp of this is important to me. A star is just an arbitrary thing that a user puts on a project, right? And one of the interesting cases that came out is Vue passed React in the number of stars this year. Not downloads or uses or any of that stuff, but people who've said, I want to track this project is important. These are older numbers, but these numbers have gone for Vue is now from 40K is now 111,000. React is from 28 to 108,000. Angular is from 12 to 39,000. And Preact is 19K, but we're seeing a bigger number here, especially for Vue, though. A lot of interest and excitement about it at that level. A really good place to go look for additional information is the Insight section of GitHub. Gives you it shows you a little bit about what's been actually happening in real terms in terms of check-ins. So I'm on the Insight page, for instance. Here is for AngularJS. And you can clearly start noticing some things. First of all, really nice long line since 2010 that this has been worked on. But it's kind of clear to see starting around 2017 that we've got a pretty substantial drop off in this is check-ins. And if we start looking at some of the major people that were involved in it, we start seeing some interesting traffic patterns. We're seeing people who dropped off. They're not supporting it at all anymore. In fact, if you look at the top 4 people and say who's been contributing recently, it's a little bit over in this corner, right? So they're dropping traffic and they're doing this. This makes sense for a project that's not being, is not moving forward though, right? If we compare that to Angular project, it's got a shorter timeline with a lot of activity. And I think only maybe him with this one. Interesting stat is that some of the people that were the big contributors on Angular have moved over and are now big contributors on this project. So you see that they're moving staff in this direction. This is Angular. And it also, I personally like, there's a couple things I liked about this. There's a large number of people with a large number of commits on this project. I also personally like seeing stuff like this. The leader, they dropped off. And it's been okay, right? You've got other people that have picked up that mantle and continued. I don't want a project where somebody gets hit by a bus and is going to flounder. So this one's clearly showing that type of support. Next one's React, similar concept. What's this guy's name? He did create. I'm sorry.
Dan Abramoff.
Abramoff, yeah, and Redux. So this guy's been the big presence in React recently. Did Redux, did a lot of stuff for them. Has been a big contributor. But there's also a large number of contributors to this one that have been involved in various ranges over the years as well. It's on version 16 something, 16.4 maybe now. So this one's also been around, had a consistent model, has a variety of people that have been involved in the life cycle of it. So, and now this is going to come up. This is sort of my beef with Vue, by the way. As exciting as Vue is, the one place where I do have some concern is this particular tab. So here is the life cycle for Vue, which first of all, I was curious to see. It's basically not showing much in the way of updates. We had a little spike back in March. That doesn't mean that there's a problem with that. In fact, there's this for a certain market. You might say, I am so happy with the way it is right now. I'm just fine with them not updating it all the time. It's a smaller, simpler interface. It doesn't have to be updated as much. I mean, it's not especially a bad thing, but it clearly is different. The thing that I question about with this particular chart particularly is, do you notice how much this looks like this? This is Evan Vue. So he has 2,060 commits on the project. The next highest number of commits on the project, 47, and drops from there. There's a lot of work on the idea of having this supported, by having the community that's supporting it, but I am still waiting to see other people being more active in checking into the core project. This does make me nervous.
Is there a version for the Sony PlayStation, or is it using the same version?
No, this is their project. This has nothing. This doesn't have anything to do with PlayStation. There's a product. PlayStation has a product Vue that has nothing to do with this. So for this,
I thought they were using the library.
I do not believe so. It's just when you do like more open searches, PlayStation Vue, and if somebody knows what PlayStation Vue is, you can tell me. But apparently, there's some kind of a separate project that will show up under searches, even like electronics, computer technology searches. But this is purely the framework here.
Okay, that's where.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't super clear about it. But so these statistics are important to me.
That's interesting, but could it also be related to the fact that it uses smaller framework, whereas most of the work is being done in the ecosystem around the core?
Yeah, there's Vuex. There's a separate router, and I don't know off the top of my head how those are related in terms of how they track them on this framework. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is it.
It isn't. Yeah, it's a data point. Oh, Stack Overflow. Some of us use that too, maybe. Also has a set of statistics. They did a good article at the beginning of the year called "The Brutal Life Cycle of JavaScript Frameworks." I recommend reading it. This was showing questions asked over time. jQuery, Angular, which has dropped as React, and I'm sorry, AngularJS has dropped as Angular in blue and React in green have gone up. Yes.
So the PlayStation Vue is actually a streaming experience.
Okay. Oh, bottom corner. Vue, Backbone, Ember, not count for questions. Significantly less. And I've had people point out it's because Framework X is so awesome that you'd never have to ask a question. Sure. There are a couple interesting stats from that brutal lifecycle one. This is a breakdown by different industry between React and Angular. And what we find, so tech and media on the React side, academic, barely. Insurance, manufacturing, finance on the Angular side. And if you want to stereotype that into geographies, we find similar things. Ashburn, Chicago, Washington, Redmond on the Angular side. San Francisco, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, Seattle on the React side. There's a pretty strong trend in regards to that. And one of the arguments that he makes in a different article from Free Code Camp, though, is saying the Angular is not trying to fight React head-to-head anymore. Instead, it's refocusing on the enterprise market. React is saying, we are the enterprise solution.
Angular is Angular.
Yeah. I find the idea of enterprise a little wonky for me, right? I mean, you can argue. I think maybe their argument is there are more things that are out-of-the-box decisions being made for Angular than where React maybe there's a community making calls on some of those things, and you might find that some of those change more often as a result. So, but this is something, and it is material. It's not just an opinion or a point. It shows up in statistics as well. It's one of the reasons if you go look at Monster, for instance, this is a Washington. This is a metric, right? Too. It's like who's out looking for things. I did a search for the DC area. React, by the way, by far the winner in terms of downloads, NPM loads, and things at this point, right? React is the clear and away winner. But in this particular area, so this is maybe 6 months ago, and this is last night stats or the Washington DC. Crazy to think of jQuery actually being lower than Angular in my mind. But yeah, you see things like React has got a significantly lower number in this area. And Vue is tiny. So not especially good or bad, but it is a data point, right? It's interesting. In this area, this reflects more of what people are looking for at this point. Okay. Next point, frameworks. Angular. And so just quickly going to talk about some of the fundamentals of these. Let me ask, who here is using Angular? I have only used Angular for basically prototype projects. But let me jump in with this, but I would like to ask you guys for some feedback on this. It is really, the key term for me is platform. It is meant for a development platform solution, mobile desktop applications, TypeScript. You don't have to use TypeScript. But is anybody not using TypeScript to build an Angular project? I think everybody should.
So heavily encourage you to use TypeScript.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at the examples where it was doing things with ES5, and I don't know of anyone who is. So, but they really are looking at a large-scale solution out of the box. We're thinking about really the whole ecosystem in terms of what you would develop. Yeah, can use it other things. You're really going to be using TypeScript.
Well, the thing is, if you use it with, for example, VS Code, and TypeScript was made by Microsoft, and it's just awesome.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's, I don't know. I started personally with C# back in the years, and that's when C# was their main thing for Visual Studio, and they really focused on doing it right. So same thing with TypeScript and VS Code. They just made it easy to use.
So Anders Helsberg, is that his name, who did a lot of development for, I think, for Delphi and C#, does a lot of work on TypeScript. And there are some similarities. But TypeScript also seems to be doing a lot of leadership in what ends up in the JavaScript standard too. So it's not a one-off. It seems like you're seeing a lot of that motion. So Angular is a Google product, just like Polymer. It's interesting. I got to talk to somebody from the Polymer team about what the breakdown was. And more or less, he said he hated Angular. Why would you ever use it? It sucks. Yeah, I mean, it was a really like a weird, apparently contentious inside the organization decision. I didn't think that Google would do that. It is a component-based solution. We are not doing MV star solutions so much anymore in all of these cases. We are building components that intercommunicate. You have a template system which resembles HTML. We can show you some examples. They scope CSS. Vue is the other one that does this as well as part of each component. The idea is to really try to address some of the issues with AngularJS is a major facet of this. So things like two-way data binding they're moving away from it. Like the other frameworks at this point, they're doing a CLI, although I think they started it for the modern, well, Ember did, then they started for the next one. It does have default opinions more so than the other frameworks. Okay, good. Yes, it's ambitious. It's trying to do everything. It's catching up, right? It didn't do everything out of the box, but they're constantly working on improving it. Your manager has heard of Angular, and if you say you're doing an Angular project, they probably won't look at you funny, right? In fact, if you say you have to upgrade Angular, that might be a lot easier than if you go to your manager and tell them, well, I'm switching to React. Whoa, what's that about? You know, realistically, sometimes those things matter. Very simple example. For templating purposes, this is the way a lot of this works. So we're moving away from that, MV total separation model. But in general, you have directives inside of your tags for things like conditional logic and looping. You are wrapping your events with parentheses. You're wrapping your attributes in brackets. You're still using your double mustache braces for things like this. I mean, this type of model should still look pretty familiar for folks that have been doing this type of stuff. And on the back end, we are using, this is TypeScript, very much TypeScript with a little bit of ES6 thrown in. We have a class-based approach towards building components. This is straight for our C# developers. This is straight, you know, this has TypeScript component attributes. I forget, I get my C# and my TypeScript naming mixed up. But yeah, attribute-based things. So these are decorators that describe classes. This is, but very much this is that model of how you have a component. You have a template, you have a style, and then you have your logic that's going to represent things like state and events. React. React is from Facebook. And there's been some controversy about that over licensing. Although the idea is if you're using a more recent version of that, they've basically dropped their issues and they've gone to the similar open source model, the alternatives. If you use an old version, you might find yourself still restricted by it, though. They say they're focusing on user interfaces, and they have built separate libraries for web, for mobile, and for VR. There's also separate open source ones for things like building Word and PDF documents, for instance. It is, just like we said for Angular, a component-based design at the heart. And in regards to all of these frameworks, you will find that they're very similar in that capacity. We've moved away from the traditional model of MV whatever. We've moved into this idea you build components and they communicate with each other. People say it's a higher developer learning curve, but that investment is largely going to be in really understanding how ES6 works and a little bit about functional programming. So you can make the argument that this is an investment in technology that you can use other places as well. Oh, yeah, we just talked about that. You will use a build process realistically for React, just like you will for Angular. So if you were looking for the good old days of having a script on your file for the newer ones, you're probably going to use Vue. There's a concept of virtual DOM that Vue and React use, which says the slow part of these applications in many cases are the actual DOM manipulation calls. So they create a JavaScript object, really a JavaScript object that represents the DOM, and they do a step where you update that virtual DOM, and it makes a decision the most efficient way to update the actual DOM behind you. And that is meant to improve the performance of the system. There's a whole syntax. We'll just show you JSX, a very weird syntax when you first see it for building these. This one, in a lot of ways, is more different than the other frameworks we're talking about because of how JavaScript-centric it is for development. Redux is a very popular library that people use for building state into applications. Their CLI is Create React App. It's very simplistic, but it does a very good job at the simple things it does. So this is the example that we could talk about. I think I might have to scroll this one. But in the previous one, we had this HTML block, right? There was a template, and we had added some attributes and added some tags in this. If you notice this, we have a JavaScript class we're doing, right? I've added an event for some interactivity. And then the template, quote unquote, let's see if I can do this without switching pages. Are people used? Well, let me go down to render. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm on the wrong page. There we go. The page is open. So does anybody, if you haven't been using React, or you're used to seeing JavaScript that looks like this, right? That's kind of weird, isn't it? This is a JavaScript file. It uses a technology called JSX, which converts this sort of XML syntax into JavaScript calls for you. So you literally do really spend your time writing JavaScript in React. And to me, it's a little less designer friendly as a result. However, I appreciate the fact if I wanted to use a map or a set or an object literal instead of an array or such, it's JavaScript. Just do it however you want. So there's more flexibility that comes with that, along with a breakdown of the more traditional CSS, HTML, JavaScript, logical jobs. For React, it's supposed to be open and everybody's supposed to be doing different things for HTTP and for router and for those things. But in reality, there's a lot of consensus on React Router. And formerly Axios, and now I'm using Fetch for requests. So, you know, the community is pretty standardized in those results. Also, I'm using Create React App. So Vue is the small but upcoming alternative. For a lot of people, there's some excitement about this being the best alternative for switching from AngularJS because it's more logically similar in some ways, including the idea of I'm using a script tag and I'm building from there. You know, the other thing that you get into with this that can be confusing is there really are two models that people actively use for Vue. One is a script tag, and on a script tag added to your HTML document and a little bit of code in a Vue call that wraps your logical functionality in your page. So you have an HTML document, you're doing a little bit of JavaScript, and that's it. The other one is you use a front-end client process like React and Angular is using, and you build a special kind of a file that uses a template, then has a source code in the middle and has your styling as components separately. Like you don't follow the more traditional HTML model. You don't stick a script tag at the top. You're building components like the other frameworks, and it has sort of more so the pros and cons of that other approach. So where you could theoretically do that more simplistic model with React and Angular, I don't know anybody who does. I do know people that are going with the more simplistic model for Vue and are excited about having that option. It also uses a virtual DOM. This is one of those simplistic cases I was talking about where you just refer to the library and you need a little bit of code here that says for my Vue code is going to run in an element called app, and then you're able to pass in your data and your methods there to operate on the code in that section. People like it also because it's easier, arguably, to mix with other frameworks. That you can add a single Vue component in that will work nicely in a larger, more complex environment. I'm going to skip because we're going close on time. Yeah. Okay, last but not least on options, none of the above. Why are we using any of these? Unless you're a job that requires you to use a framework, don't use it, just learn it. You know, there was a gentleman that's made. This knowledge, the actual framework will expire fast. The knowledge about how frameworks work will serve you forever. And GitHub was a case of somebody, they make some pretty nice arguments for doing this. I say no for almost all cases. The real question here is there a framework that comes close to matching what you are trying to do with your system? And if there is, why would you not take advantage of it? If somebody's giving you something that's better supported than you're going to be able to do for free, that's going to have extra eyes on it, going to fit into a nice model, what's the disadvantage of doing that? Because I've maintained frameworks before. I don't know if anyone else has, but
yeah, those people that say this most times are the ones that want to solve the framework problem instead of solving the business case problem.
Yeah.
They like solving the problems that have already been solved.
I find it very appealing when I talk to customers to be able to tell them what I'm working on in terms of a problem they've asked me for. And when I get into this framework stuff, I get really hypothetical with those guys really fast. Right? I like to be able to say it has to do with that requirement. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I'm saying, but if there's a framework that does what you're doing and it meets your requirements, think hard about, you can have your home project, man. Go write your own thing, but consider that. A couple other factors that are still out there to consider. Component-based development. Web components have been around for years now, but have gotten very limited market share so far. This is a set of things, well, HTML imports are dead, but custom elements and components and shadow DOM. There's a few of these and observables, right? There's a few of these technologies which were meant to take a lot of what we do in these libraries and pull them into the actual JavaScript and HTML language and make them easier to do and to available cross framework as well. Sounds really good in principle. They have not become particularly popular. And honestly, it's generally easier to write web components with the front-end frameworks than it is with the native technology. I believe that it is a bad idea to chase these directly at this point, although GitHub disagrees with me, because I believe that the Angulars and the Vues and the Reacts of the world will be able to incorporate these for you and you will be able to get those advantages without having to take the risk of going off and doing your own thing. My 100% opinion on that. AngularJS, we just talked about this, but the question is, where is the market going to go? There's a very reasonable chance that a lot of people working on Angular are going to say that they want to continue to work on Angular, even if it's a completely different framework, and that we might see a substantial increase in the amount of use of the Angular library as that happens over the next 3 years. WebAssembly, you guys familiar with this? Different way to do binaries. Anybody seen Blazor? Like the .NET guys did Blazor. I think Blazor is a horrible idea, by the way. Never use Blazor. They missed the boat. It's the idea for WebAssembly is a way to do optimized, super fast processing in a way that JavaScript can't accomplish in some cases. It's not fixing DOM. It's not fixing all those problems. It's fixing really mathematical processing problems. And so if you're doing things with Canvas or some of those cases, sure. But Blazor is something that lets you download a 5 meg file to basically do the same thing Angular does for you.
I have an update to that now where like you're running the logic still on the server, so it's almost kind of web formish, I guess, but you're passing it down via single R. So it's still running on the client.
It's all bad.
Yeah.
Horrible idea. I do a lot of Microsoft stuff. I love a lot of those guys, and I think they do a lot of stuff. But for me, on this one particular case, it's a neat idea. It's fun to run, but it really doesn't solve a problem that needs to be solved. WebAssembly is great, and I would not be surprised if we don't see WebAssembly being incorporated into frameworks for the things that it's good at. But it's not really got a heavy overlap, in my opinion, like animation type of stuff maybe, but not the traditional model stuff. Progressive web applications, I think, will have a big impact on the market. There's sort of the idea for this is effectively you're putting a proxy between your website and the internet, and you are able to cache or operate on file requests in JavaScript instead of having them happen automatically. So the easy case to think about this is caching, right? You can just cache all this stuff, and you can run. I have applications I've written using web technology that run effectively natively on my phone or my browser without requiring an internet connection. I do have a question in my mind about, does that solve some of the single page application issues maybe better than single page applications do? Can this fit that model of saying, yeah, use whatever URLs, do whatever you want in a very native fashion, but I'm going to have this proxy that's going to solve that without kind of having to put a hokey single page, kind of facade in front of it. So this could fit into it, but there's nobody doing this yet. Oh yeah, it doesn't work so much. Any of the front-end frameworks on this. We are getting an increasing number of alternative interfaces. So don't get too tied to any of your favorites, because the world will change out from underneath you. And it's either going to be voice-activated systems, or it's going to be crazy holograms, or it's going to be something with a chip in your head. But it's going to change, and the right answer isn't going to be to take some legacy framework that was solving old problems, previous problems. So in conclusion, congratulations. You are living at the best time possible to have to worry about this kind of technological decision. Your project will not fail because you're picking Vue or React or Angular, or honestly, probably AngularJS, as long as you're not there too long. Not really at all, right? We have these fantastic options that you can choose from, and it's not driven so much from a failure, but honestly, from your ability to adopt them successfully in your team and your organization. That is going to be the biggest challenge of these things. There's optimizations, and you should look for the best one in your case. But chances are the one you pick won't be the failing point. You need to think about the setup and the review of your technology process. And you need to create something that's going to bring other people in and make them part of that story. You want to think about what you're creating when you do a technology decision like this. It's not just an email that says we're using Vue. What are you doing to help people be successful on that and help bring them into those decisions? What was your job? First thing, my first IT job, my boss asked me that question on the first day. What's your job? It's really managing people's expectations, because your framework choice is going to go out of style and not be supported at some point in the future. I've had milk that lasts longer than some JavaScript frameworks. I mean, I think the current ones have some legs, but things will change again too. Nancy Duarte had a good idea drawing that this is in general, but it certainly goes for technology. Technologies come, they grow, they mature, and they die. And part of our job as technicians is to try to understand that and figure out when is the right time to be making these decisions. When you have that Angular JS app, when is that point where you need to hop? Because you do lose efficiency for a while when you do.
Well, it's like, do you switch now? Or do you write another 3 years worth of code and then switch that?
Yes. Yeah. And if you haven't seen I can recommend some talks on that too. Yeah, but this is the process you're going to do. And even your current favorite is also going to grow and expand and slow down and die. And if you can set that expectation with people, then you're going to have a much happier time a few years down the road. The important part of this is your team. For all of these decisions is you need to have a group of people that you can find consensus with that can be part of these decisions. Otherwise, quite often, you're going to find a group of people that have their own personal interests and motivations, and they're going to have problems with some of these if they were not brought in. There isn't a right decision that you can pick, that you can defend, regardless of your case. So think about how to make this a group decision. And part of that is, when we're making, and I'm stealing this from Nancy Duarte too, there's a temptation when you're doing these things to think of yourself as sort of the hero of this amazing story. You should not be the hero. You should be Yoda, right? You're the guy that's kind of going around and whispering in the ear and helping the heroes make their part of this decision too, right? Think about that in terms of your location, and you're part of this overall system. In terms of a couple suggestions about things that you can be giving out to people. I don't know why I put that house icon in. I should take that. But the couple of things that need to be part of the package with a bow on it when you're doing this type of selection process. Do you have a sample app that people are going to be able to use? Is there training available for people? Do you have experts that can help people learn about technical problems that they're having? Do people have time that they can use to learn about these things? People are usually excited if they get an opportunity to become proficient in things. If you have a build process, do you have the build process that people can use so they don't have to invent it at the start of their first project? Have you thought about integrations with the tools and the systems in the organization? Not only does this make people successful, but just to think the negative side, when the person comes out next week and says, I think we should all do this on spanking new project X, is to tell them, I would just like to see these type of things from you as well. It's not just an idea, do the necessary work, to evaluate and make something a good decision. A lot of the times it turns out that people fall off when you ask them to do the work it takes to have a successful call like that. So in closing, I hope this has been helpful in terms of making your next decision. Every once in a while I have somebody tell them, but you didn't tell me whether I should be using Vue or Angular or stuff. I hope we've maybe covered why. We have great framework opportunities, but think about the process and you can be successful in doing that. I want to say, being here with NASA, I just wanted to say my little thank you. I am the downstream from the kid who sent the letter to NASA asking how the astronauts got out of the spaceship without losing all the oxygen. NASA, who sent me a note back with a poster of Skylab showing, and a nice letter describing that airlock and how that worked. And I've been a fan ever since. You guys do a lot of the work sort of on the, when we talk about things being impossible, you guys are the ones, sometimes people say, well, NASA did it, they do it in space. Right? So thank you on behalf of the rest of the development community for the things you do. It is really important. I appreciate it. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Questions?
Okay. So do you believe the reason from going from the model view to the component is because of the cloud?
No. I think it's because Polymer. I really think Polymer came out as an attempt to establish that, really make web components successful. And I think it influenced the design decisions of the framework makers. I think they saw that and it appealed to them and they made the call based on that. Everybody sort of moved after Polymer.
So
I think.
for the clouds, are one of these better than the others? Because one of the things that I have seen is when you have a lot of data, big data, they start getting boggled down trying to visualize, or they blow up after 100,000 points of, if you're trying to do like a scatter plot or an image.
Yeah.
These things start showing their edges.
Sure, absolutely. How do you implement those? And people, they all have their libraries for animation type of stuff. I mean, and I've had some questions about that, and a lot of that has to do with you have to kind of look at a particular project. I had a guy talking to me about Angular because RxJS is a framework, and he was very happy with how easy it was to implement RxJS, which is a library meant for doing what's the great way to describe RxJS? If you could think of
Flowdash for events.
Yeah, for really taking like real-time data, like you're getting real-time data and you're able to treat it like an array over time. It's a weird decision. Yeah, really handling that type of stuff. Reasonable module, nicely done in Angular out of the box, this guy was saying. One of the other questions is about virtual DOM, right? The Vue and React are both using virtual DOMs, which are meant for helping to deal with performance on DOM-related issues. And you can look at whether that model is a good solution for the stuff you're doing or not. I'm wondering, there was even a discussion about maybe Angular picking up some virtual DOM.
Redid their Vue engines. Like you said, they all borrow from each other. Once one finds out a good idea, it's more or less shows up in the others over a period of time.
I've seen some Ember talks too with one of the guys who wrote it, just going into saying, here's our 16 millisecond refresh cycle, and talking about what they were doing synchronously and asynchronously to make sure they were absolutely constantly hitting 16 millisecond refresh times, so that they could say we are optimized to the traditional refresh rate of your devices. You know, that there are people thinking about those type of problems too. But DOM can be slow.
Yes.
Most times when you have that problem, though, it's not the framework; it's the way the code is written. That's utilizing the framework that ends up being the real bottleneck. Whether or not you should actually display a million things is the question. Not whether or not you can display a million things.
Yeah. And there's the whole question about the way these things. A lot of them are doing the rendering for you, so it's based on the way that you change state. You change state, the system repaints it for you. So if you change first name from X to Y, you don't actually re-render anything. It does it for you. Does that model work? And are you writing code that optimizes that idea? Those are the things I end up thinking about. But I haven't been dealing with, a lot of serious performance issues and that stuff. And in terms of cloud, I don't know.
Question.
Sure.
So which one do you use and why?
Did anybody figure out which one I use all the time?
It's React.
It's React. I use React all the time. So I mean, no problem with any of the other ones, but yeah, I mostly do React.
We're just starting.
Which is technically not a framework, right?
I don't. Yeah. That whole framework library, whatever thing. Yes. It's.
We're just starting with React for one of the projects that I'm on, and wrapping my head around not just the JSX is fine, but some of the other patterns, and I told one of the developers that's on the team is a little bit more experienced. Like, I'm gonna dive into it over the weekend and come back to you with questions, because it could be that I'm just looking at really, really horrible code. And it's not the actual framework.
Yeah.
But
they did just change the event model, right? They're just changing some of the events, and there's some non-trivial things. They're giving you a lot of space to do those things, and there's all the things we're not covering about, like functional versus stateful components in React. We could talk about all that, but there was a learning curve. But I felt like once I was over that, like it was easy to develop and maintain too.
So Redux, Relay.
Redux.
Apollo.
Well, the thing with Redux is they've changed the context API, and we're just on full-on wonk. Sorry, so thank you if anybody doesn't care. But they're changed. So Redux is great and has worked well for me. There's this idea of like kind of global state for your application. Does that match what you want your app to do? Every time I do a talk about React and I try to quickly explain Redux to people, I feel like I horribly fail. It turns out that it's it's a harder concept for people to grasp initially. But second time or third time you're through it, you're going to have it, and you'll just have it forever. It's almost like you have a message bus that you've wired to the side of your app. You tell it to do things, it will tell the right places, that have registered for it when things change. Yeah, and you can, and then Saga or Thunk or, there's those other decisions to make. Yeah, there's decisions, and I'm trying to use Fetch instead of Axios for everything now.
Okay.
But
Their browser support.
it's certainly obtainable. All of this is obtainable, and I was a big believer in the separation of templating, and the idea that I'm writing JSX really felt wrong to me. But then, but at the end, I was like, I'm not suffering that penalty I thought I was going to have. That I was standing on my principles. But later, I was like, but it's working. It's fast and it's easy to support. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to say that there was that MPJ guy. Yeah, the Fun Function video series.
I don't know.
Oh, you should check him out. He's really great.
Yeah, he's fun.
Yeah, he's kind of hilarious. But yeah, he's like, well, yeah, everybody argues that there's like this CSS, JavaScript, HTML separation of concerns, but are those actually your concerns?
Yeah.
Yeah, was it like, is the component your separation of concerns, and you want to be just concerned about a component?
Yeah,
And
that's
then
the
why
argument.
not put all the stuff for that component together and then separate out the component stuff into separate places?
Right. Yeah.
No matter what language it's in.
Or you get the cases too with Webpack too, where you're like, well, it's taking some of my style sheets and my images maybe and making effectively JavaScript out of them.
Right.
But do I care? Like, do I care if what I'm maintaining is sort of logical? Do I care about the output? We're working all those out.
Yeah, sometimes you just gotta get over that stuff.
So I'm going to mute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Any other? I'm Steve Albers. Did I spell it right?